Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to subscribe today. All right, episode 47 of the Asking Why podcast. We have been on a little break, so I'm sorry for our listeners who've had to wait like 3 weeks to get a new episode. My family, as we talk about parenting today, has been sick, and we have little kids, and it has just been, they're little petri dishes, and they bring everything home, and then we get half of it, and then we get all of it, and then it's just been back and forth. And so with COVID going around and whatever the new variant is, we just wanted to be safe and kind of stay off the air. And also I couldn't talk. And so, there wasn't much I was going to be able to say without hacking a lung up. So I am going to probably cough a little bit today during the podcast. So I apologize for that. Anyway, let's get started. We got Mary Kate back again today. Mary Kate's a therapist over in our Ruston office, and she is an LPC. She's a play therapist. PLPC, that's right. You're working on it.
Yep.
When do you get your license?
In the future.
Nice. Right. Well,
Between kids and...
That's right.
Right. Due to the podcast that we'll do today, it's like just with kids and, working on licensure. I'll get there. Probably in about 2 years. Yeah.
So for people to understand that, licensure means that she's going through the licensure process right now. So provisionally licensed is what PLPC stands for. So you have your master's and you're just doing your hours and, counting those up and supervision and all that kind of stuff. But you're a real deal therapist and full-blown therapist. But.
Yeah. Just for the public safety, we just have a lot of hours to put in.
Absolutely.
Before we're licensed. It's a good thing.
We talked about it before. When I was a provisionally licensed therapist, it was called counselor intern. And so it was the worst because you're licensed, you're just provisionally licensed. But as a counselor intern, you're like leaving an internship and then you're now a big boy, with a master's and working, but you're still an intern.
And that sounds like you're still learning.
Oh yeah, it sounds way off. I mean, it sounds to the public, it's like, oh, you're an intern. Like I definitely don't want to see you.
Right.
Yeah, let me get somebody who's at least provisionally, has a license.
Like provisionally licensed sounds.
Like, oh yeah, that does sound better.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those listening, that's kind of what that means. All right, so we're going to talk about parenting today, and we're going to talk a little bit about understanding the child's brain, and we'll talk a little bit about Christmas and maybe some things that are going on during the holidays that parents are dealing with and frustrated with, or maybe some new ideas to do things for folks that are, tired of doing things the old way.
Yeah. Or you find yourself just frustrated with the holidays and prepping yourself for all that will mean.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So, Mary Kate, tell us who you are, and for those who haven't listened or people who maybe have, remind us.
Okay. I never know where to start on that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Mary Kate Cortez. I live in Ruston with my husband. We actually had our 7th anniversary Monday.
Nice.
And we have 2 kids. We have a 3-year-old little girl, 18-month-old little boy. And so similar to what Clint was just saying, just in the middle of it with kids. And so this is something just personal experience of just what it's like to be a parent. And there's a lot there. But then also as I'm working towards becoming a registered play therapist, which just takes time, just learning a lot about kids and how they operate, along with just, all the trainings that, we've all done of just how to understand the brain. I think as more neuroscience comes out and the more trainings we take and that's kind of integrated into it, that's a lot of therapists hopefully are just kind of in that world of understanding it and just the books we're reading. So that's just to kind of give some, context for just coming into the podcast, the personal and the professional, that's there. And so, I used to teach. I taught 3rd grade for 2 years. Bless them. And my husband's also in the school system. And it wasn't a good fit. And so, went and got my master's in counseling. And so, and I've said this before on the podcast, but literally by the grace of God, ended up in Clint's office literally I think it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like in December.
Yeah.
Sitting down with you and you, you know, throwing out to open a practice in Ruston, which felt like that was just not even possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just so surprised by that. So it's just been really fun to get that going, you know, and the team that we have there. So we just, you know, added another integrated wellness member. We have Jess with life coaching, and then Rachel in dietetics, and then we have 2 other counselors. And so Olivia and Tyler, and it's been really fun.
Yeah.
Just to have that. We're all Louisiana Tech grads and just love the community there and love being able to be a part of it in some really cool ways. And
we need another therapist in Ruston. So if you're listening to this, or an integrative wellness person, if you want to partner with us over there, and you know, you want a good work environment, and
yeah, and that's one of the things that you told me when we met. Like, hey, we'll get this started, and the Lord will definitely, like, He will be in it all. Which I didn't understand all of that at the moment. And I was like, okay, like sure, yeah, and. You know, just seeing how the practice has grown, and so we're full, and needing, especially with play therapy, it's like I can only take so many clients, especially in the afternoon, just needing some help with that. So yeah, we would love to have another therapist just to refer to, because there's just something really neat about keeping it. Not that there's not therapists outside of our practice that I don't trust, but just in house, I'm like, I can definitely verify this is a solid person,
right? And
you will be taken care of well, because therapy is a hard thing to step into.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so even in my own life, trying to do, you know, therapy, it's like I'm in this world and I can find it hard to step into it and to find somebody I trust. And so I can only imagine what it's like when you're not in the world of therapy and you don't know what you're looking for or what you're going to need out of it. So
I know this is going a different direction, but how has that been for you as a mom and a wife going to therapy? Can you talk a little bit about maybe barriers or, how that's improved your parenting, improved your wifing?
Yeah. Every time I think about counseling, I just want to cry. I just feel so vulnerable every time I step in there. I don't like it. Yeah. I'm like, I want to be on the other side. Let me take your spot. Yeah. And so it's been really good. There was barriers going into it, I think, because as a mom, you're kind of like, when do I have time for that? Like, I have kind of built my schedule. I work part-time specifically so I can spend more time with my kids, because of how it's set up. We get that luxury, and it's really great. But that means that I want to keep it. I protect the time of my kids, like at all costs. So I don't want to take the days off to go to counseling. But then I want to take the days that I work and really work. And it's really hard for me to feel, I remember thinking like, I don't have time for this, which is literally everybody's excuse. Right. And I can't be like everybody else and say that if I'm going to ask my clients to do the work that they're doing, I can't not do it.
Yep.
And so it's like, what is taking an hour out of my week? And so it happened to actually work out well kind of during the work week when my kids are where they need to be already at daycare. And so that's been good, and just committing to it, the cost of it, the financial side of just like, okay, I'm going to do this because I also know that this person's worth it.
Right.
And so,
I think that's a huge thing too. I talk to all of y'all about going to counseling, and I want everybody here to be in therapy or at least meeting with a spiritual advisor or something. Because there's nothing like being on the couch on the other side and remembering what it's like.
Yeah.
When your therapist yawns, or when they're late, or when they check their clock, or when they do whatever. Right. And you're like, are you listening to me? Are you bored? Or all the things our clients say to us, which has nothing to do with why we check the clock.
Right. It's just to make sure I'm not about to ask a very loaded question, which I've done like 3 minutes before, and my client's crying, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
I gotta wrap this up somehow.
Yeah, people forget that we have to keep track of the time.
Yeah.
So we have our clocks strategically placed to where you just have to glance at it quickly, so you're not like, where's the clock, and looking behind you. And,
I'm like strategically like,
like
pulling my sleeve up.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or even being asked why, being challenged and being like, I don't know, stop asking me.
Right.
Like, or I don't really want to go there, or cry. Like, I never understood why clients would apologize for crying, and that's what I'm like, I'm so sorry I'm doing this. Yeah. Even though I know that's why therapy is there.
Right.
So it's just helped me have a place to process, and just even my own counselor helped me, even with the holidays, I was describing my kids and what they were like, especially the day after my husband went back to work, which my oldest always struggles with. She loves routine and she loves her dad. And so she'll wake up, where's dad? It's like, and where he's at work, and she struggles. And so my counselor is just helping me understand, even though I know this stuff, it's just something about having somebody else in the room say, like, let's take a step back and look at the holidays.
Yeah.
And like, let's look at what the routine was like for your kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a great comment. We'll get into this, but saying, well, she does know where he is. It's like the reality is she doesn't.
Right.
Like we forget that. I mean, this today when I was getting ready because I told them I'm off 2 weeks. You don't have to do anything, and then he's like, "Are you going to work?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I have to do the podcast today. Really, that's it.
Yeah.
And I'll be home this afternoon, and this is the only thing I'm doing."
Right.
I mean, he was like so confused. This morning they were asking to play Nintendo Switch, and we don't let them play it except for on the weekends.
Right.
And because they had no clue what day it is because they hadn't went to school since whatever.
They're like,
so they were mad. They were like,
free-for-all.
we're supposed to play. And I was like, no, Grady, mine are 4 and 7, 2 boys, and Grady and Jude. And he's like, but it's the winter, or what do you say? It's Christmas break. We don't get to play Nintendo every day. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to place it. And that's what, like, cause I'll even say, sometimes I'll do some play therapy lingo back to her. Like, so you're wondering where dad is.
Right.
And she'll say, he's at work. I'm like, you know where he is.
Yeah. Can you explain what you mean by that?
The play therapy lingo.
Yeah.
Like what that means.
Yeah. Like what you were doing in that scenario.
So I think a lot of it is our kids are they're saying something almost different than what they're saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when my kid says, and Isabella, she's my oldest, she's like, she'll ask me several times, where's dad? And, in that, I'm frustrated because I'm giving her the logical answer. He's at work. In that, she's saying she misses her dad and she wants him home.
Right.
And so I'll say, you're wondering where he is, because that's what's happening. She's wondering, he's, and so she'll state, he's at work. I'm like, and you really wish he was here. Because that's what she's saying in it.
Right. So you're giving her the language.
Yeah. I'm connecting we'll get into that with the brain and just how that's structured, but I'm giving her the language that she does not have and the feelings. I mean, she doesn't really know what she's feeling.
I'm front feeding an example so we can go back to it as we go.
Yeah. And so, so in that, it takes me a lot to slow down enough to do that, because even though it's very easy 45 minutes in a play therapy session, that's my job, is to I'm here to reflect what you're feeling and what I think what you're thinking. But to do that in day-to-day life is hard. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I took Isabella to my playroom. I had to go print something off at work over the weekend. And so she loves the playroom. There's just something about the playroom, the sand tray specifically. And so I left her for a minute to go print something. I come back and her sand tray is filled. I'm so proud of her. She did nothing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Tell me, I wonder what you were doing here. The I wonder statement is just so different than saying why. They don't know why they're doing something, but when you wonder out loud, it does this really cool thing where they respond to you in it. And so she's telling me about her scene that she created. And I'm reflecting feelings like, oh, you're scared of the army men because they were the bad guys. No, I'm not scared. I mean, it's just even as I'm wondering, just stating things, she's kind of reflecting things back to me.
Mm-hmm. And she's how old?
3.
Yeah.
3.5. So, I mean, she's pretty articulate. She's your typical oldest. Mm-hmm. I don't really know if she thinks that we have things under control.
Yeah.
She was making
Well, that doesn't get any better. Grady's 7 and he, thinks we don't know how to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, even in the sand tray, she's like, I'm feeding my babies. Do not wake them. I'm like, you're really worried. I'm going to wake your babies up. Yeah, don't wake them. I was like, does she know I've done this?
Right.
With her.
Yeah. You're my baby.
Yeah. I'll say, yeah, exactly. I could go tangents. So many stories that go off of that. Yeah. But
feel free. We got plenty of time.
So I just say that to say, even it takes me even putting my kid maybe in a playroom to slow down. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of in awe of what she's able to do, but then also how I get to come in and connect things for her. And I don't do that in day-to-day life all the time.
Yeah, no, as we do this podcast, when we've done these with parenting or me and you've talked or whatever, I'm always like, I stink as a parent. That's what we don't want people to hear on here. We all feel like that. I think all of us, especially moms, but I can speak from a dad perspective, feel the parent guilt of, I'm not doing enough, I'm not being therapeutic enough, I'm not. So I don't want people to take away from this podcast that we're giving you all this perfection to do and that everything we do in our house is this therapeutic
Zen environment. Everybody loves each other all
intervention.
The time.
This morning I'm like, okay, I got to hold it together and they were acting insane. And I'm like, I got to hold it together because I'm going to a parenting podcast with Mary Kate and I'm not you wanting to use any of the things that I know I need to be doing.
Right. Oh, I've gone drop my kids off and I lost it. I mean, just before, every parent knows what it's like to leave the house. Trying to get everybody's stuff together, trying to get the kids in the car, being asked questions. They're all they can't do anything apart from you. All of a sudden.
Nobody can put their shoes on. Somebody's got to pee. I mean,
right. And so I have, my amygdala, which we'll go over, goes off, and I have to go and repair that. Like, I've sat in therapy session, like, do I need to drive back to daycare and hug my child and tell her I'm sorry? And which I've already done that. Like, those things have already happened, but there's just something, like, I've been on the way to a play therapy session after I've done that. And just the amount of guilt that can come with that of, like, she's going to be in therapy one day and her therapist is going to ask her what I did for a living.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of questions,
That's
you
right.
know? And so, anyway, I mean, that comes back to the repair part. So, yeah, in this, I think both of our heart is not to feel like, I think parents can feel beat up. And I think our culture will kind of feel like, hey, parents, get your crap together and do this a certain way.
Yeah.
And in therapy, we can even we'll go back to the parents. Hey, how did your parents treat you? So it's important, but it's not to beat your parents up. You know, like I'll tell clients, like, to honor your parents is just to tell the truth about what happened to you. It's not to make them out to be the villain in this, because we can have some grace and understanding for what happened, like from where they came from. But we also know as parents, it's just, you're not going to be perfect in it.
Yeah, for sure.
know?
I mean, I think when the most freeing thing as a child is to realize your parents did the best they could with what they had. And they were usually working from a deficit from what they got, and so on and so forth. So if you want to blame someone, once you've been in therapy for a while and understand how this works, which we'll talk a little bit about today, like, okay, well, your parents had parents, and so what they did affected them, which affected you, and they had parents. You can go back to Adam and Eve from a Christian perspective on who's at fault for there being brokenness and sin and historical issues in the world.
Right.
So it's not about blaming and making a villain, but it is about honoring, like, these things happened and shouldn't have, or these things, should have happened. And I wrote something the other day about trauma. I'm trying to think so I don't butcher it, but it was like, trauma is not just the things that happened to you that weren't supposed to. They're the things that should have happened that you never got to experience.
Yeah.
And, I was trying to find a way of saying that succinctly that made, we've talked about that a bunch, but it's like, Jesus intended you to receive this. Anything other than that has drastic consequences. They don't have to be life-altering forever, but they're going to have an effect on how you parent, how you view kids, how you view, all of those things. Which
goes into you being able to understand your own story and how you were impacted. There is, in a book that I actually have right here, Anatomy of the Soul. It's good. It's just dense. But, one of the number one indicators of secure attachment is a parent understanding their story and understanding how they're impacted, because you're going to be kind of blind to how your parents affected you 100%. And how you're coming across your own kids. Yeah, and what your kids are bringing up in you. And I think we just live right now in a huge culture. And again, if you're an older parent, it's not a shaming or blaming. We have the benefit of therapy. It's like our parents, if your parents are 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or whatever, all their childhood issues, there was not a trauma therapist they could go to when they were 15 or when they were 25 or even when they were 30. Right. This thing we're doing with counseling and therapy and trauma and understanding the brain and all the things, it's very new historically. Right. But a lot of times we're like, oh, why didn't they get their stuff together and then parent us? And it's like, well, they didn't really even have the opportunity. And they were surviving. Literally, through wars. Absolutely. And we've talked about this when you kind of go back to it, it's like, well, they were just happy to get food on the table. I mean, they were going through the Great Depression. We would make fun of our grandmother for, you never knew what was expired or not, because it would be in old containers. But then I remember my mom saying she lived through the Great Depression, so she was going to save everything. And it just had so much grace with that. It's like, oh wow, we're giving her a hard time for something that was really a coping skill. Right. And so if you understand your parents' story, then you can put it in context of your own story, right, and so on and so forth. But again, that takes a lot of work and a lot of time. It does. So I think I'm teaching our Sunday school at church right now, parenting, doing an 8-week thing, because most of us have little kids. And the first 2 sessions have been me talking about hold on, you got to understand you first, right, before I can start telling you what to do in these parenting situations, because it's always going to go back to that. Right. Right. And your own experiences and how, I mean, I just keep thinking, I think Dan Siegel uses the sense of feeling, I'm about to butcher it. It's fine. Nobody knows. Feeling felt. Is that how he says it? I think so. I've said that to a client and it made sense to him. I don't even know how to put it into words, but that sense of, what it feels like. Somebody's sensing what you're sensing. You have a sense of feeling felt. And so I think if you don't know what those things feel like, how can you do that for your kids? Right. Or how can you know how important it is? Right. How vital it is to feel known and to feel seen and to feel heard. And, a lot of times, I have a client I'm working with right now. We were talking about it yesterday or the day before. And,
If she's listening to this, she'll know she is. But shout out to you, girl. But we're talking about family systems, and she, she doesn't feel heard in her life. Like she'll express an emotion, and a family member will say, "You don't feel that way," or "No, you don't," or "That's not how that happened." And that's been her whole life. Now she's an adult, married, and all those things, and so she doesn't even know that she can ask for what she needs.
Right. Well, she probably don't even know how to trust what she feels or what she may need because she was told that she didn't.
Exactly.
And
so it's like I have this feeling. No, you don't. She tells herself that.
Right.
And so before it even gets into the conflict in marriage or with her kids or wherever, it just spirals. And so we were kind of taking that apart. And once she had that realization, then in the moment she was able to go, okay, hold on. I'm feeling this thing that's coming from what I grew up in, but that's not how I have to live now as an adult. But you can't do any of that work if you don't, if you haven't unrooted the issues.
Right.
So it takes work to be able to control these things. You can't just tell people parenting strategies and tips. I mean, there's a lot of books out there on what to do.
Right. Right. And I even, my eyes will glaze over when I hear stuff. I'm like, oh man. Like, I just think I automatically just feel tired, and maybe it's that left brain, like, logic of, like, I get that, but I need you to help me at least validate that this is hard. Like, that's why when we hear really funny parenting memes or anything, it just does something for your soul that you're like, yes.
You feel validated.
I feel so validated. And it doesn't have to end there, but that no one starts there.
Yeah. I sent JC, my wife, a little video or whatever, and it was this woman, and she was like, my husband, and then she like walks around the house and like throws her socks on the floor next to the hamper and opens all the drawers and pees all over the toilet and shaves in the sink and leaves it. Yeah, it's like 20 things.
Right.
And we were dying. And those used to make me mad. They like I'd see them and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like shame all the men in the world, Right. And now I just laugh at them because I'm like, yeah, I'm better than that.
Right.
It's an overgeneralization.
Right.
But it ain't too far off on my bad days. Like
like it may have some truth.
Yeah, 100%. And it doesn't mean, again, and that's been in our relationship, our trust is like, it doesn't mean she thinks I'm a terrible husband. It's just be honest about it. And I was telling her this weekend, I said, something happened. I don't remember what it was. And it was one of those typical things I would have gotten defensive about. And she came in and was like, hey, you were just laughing. I was like, yeah, I don't need to be Jesus for you. I used to want to be perfect so that you would feel safe and so that you would feel loved and so you would feel all these things. Perfect parent, perfect dad, perfect husband.
Right.
Now I know better. We've been married 12 years on the 12th. It's I was like, did I do that right? Because I haven't said it out loud. Yes, 12 years on the 12th this month. And the reality is like she knows me better than anybody, so I can't fake it.
Right.
And all that does is cause conflict because
right.
The reality is she knows I leave my crap everywhere.
Right. And there's a sense of safety and just kind of being able to that's almost vulnerability, to just not make fun of each other, but to kind of give each other
you gotta make fun of
a hard. Yeah. I mean, we do that. We kind of kid around like, he'll give me a hard time. Steven can do that. And I think it's funny if I do it to him, he gets his feelings hurt. It's like, but like going through that is just, but being able to laugh together. It's like, I love you. But also,
yeah, oh yeah, but you drive me crazy, and I can't stand you, and I don't understand how you do life. Like,
right?
Like how have you made it this far in whatever area it is? For me, for her it's different, and for me it's different. But it's like you just look at the other person, and you're like, why would you ever do that?
Right. That doesn't even make sense. Just do it my way.
Right, the right way.
The right way.
That's the same thing with parenting. It's like you see these videos and they're so validating to your parenting. One of my favorite ones is the whole like, it's a vacation when you get out of the car and you walk around to the other side. It's like a little mini vacation.
We like put our kids in the car before we go to church and both step inside for a minute. We're like
100%.
It's so quiet.
Oh yeah. I'm like, I'm going to get some coffee. I'm like, I got to pee.
Right. We'll both just stand there for a minute like, that feels so good. Which also is validating when your spouse is also like, yes.
Oh yeah.
I needed this too.
Yeah. We were talking about this before. Sometimes I think in order to like handle our own stress and our own anxiety and our own perfectionism and all that stuff, we end up really triggering and upsetting our spouse because we invalidate them by not just being honest about our feelings too. Right. A lot of times we're like, well, I'm going to hold it together and show them I'm a good spouse. So I'm not going to tell them this is hard. I'm not going to complain because they complain so much. And then, but you really feel that way too. And then they just feel crazy And then it's just,
cycle.
Yeah. And so sometimes, it's nice to just be like, yeah, this is crazy. They're insane. Do you want to give them back? Like, what do you want to do here? Can we leave them? Can we leave them here and just go to Target? Do you think they're old enough? They're 7.
You guys sound like an SOS. You think they can do something like that?
Smoke signal in the back.
Right. Because, sometimes in parenting it can be hard, but especially from a mom's perspective, because we usually do have our eyes on so many details of it all. We can tell dads how to do their job. And we've had conflict over this where I'll tell him how he needed to respond. He was maybe too intense. But then he'll be doing the repair process of holding our son or holding our daughter, and I'll step in the middle of it. I'm like, no, let me have him. Yeah.
Yeah. That'll burn.
Yeah. Well, and he's, rightfully so, Stephen has stood up for himself and said, let me take care of them.
Yeah.
But I think that can even, like, there's so many ways for spouses to miss each other. Because it's like, you're not doing it the way I would have done it. In some really good ways. Like, dads don't need to do it like moms do it.
Right.
Like, that's not to be that both don't need to learn, but moms are nurturing in one way and dads are just different in another way, but they're still equally good. But I think, and it probably even goes back to culture, moms are elevated, I think, I'm processing this out loud, with how they interact with kids versus how dads do. Does that make sense?
Say that again.
Like, I feel like how moms can interact with their kids, that's seen as like a better way than how dads may interact with their kids. And dads may...
For sure, it's seen that way.
Yeah, and dads may not really... I think that's easy for dads to almost want to take a step back because it's like, well, I just don't do this well.
Well, it's what's happened to our culture.
Yeah.
We've had men who have been to war for 2 generations, 3 generations, who have emotionally numbed out and been, traumatized. We've had women who have stepped out of the house into the workforce because of that, and then we switched it all back. And then, men were unemotionally, didn't know how to do it, don't know how to parent, don't know how to connect, and moms too. I mean, there's a huge generation of women who don't know how to connect or attach either.
Right.
And so, then dads have abdicated their roles in some ways because when they step in, they don't know how to do it, but they're doing the best they can. And then they get their hands slapped or they get shamed. Whether that's happening or they feel it doesn't really matter.
Right.
The consequence is I'm stepping back and I'll just let you do it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but it's the dishwasher conversation. It's, hey, I've loaded the dishwasher. I spent 30 minutes cleaning them and putting them in there. And then you come in and go, well, you didn't do this right. Or you don't even say anything. You just redo it. And then the husband feels, emasculated and not appreciated, and he walks off. And the next time the dishes are dirty, he's like, I don't want to feel rejected and shamed, so I'll just not do them and let you do them.
Right.
And sometimes the spouse is like, good.
Right.
I'll just take this over.
But then now they're resentful and feel alone.
Well, yeah, because eight dish washes later, they're like, well, I do the dishes every time.
Right.
And it's like, well, I tried to do the dishes.
Right.
And there's just those dots are not being connected. The communication's not happening.
Right. Right.
Then millions of people over the course of 10 to 20 years. Right. With 100 issues.
Yeah. You're just hearing that. You're like, man, it's like a lot to unpack. But it's like even in that, it's like, is there a willingness to let the other do stuff their way? Which is when we were talking about this before the podcast. Yeah. It's like, it's okay. Even that takes some compromise. You may not do it the way I would do it. Yeah. And that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. I would say with the dishwasher comment, just to wrap that up, I think the important part, because you can take this and put it on parenting or whatever. And we said before, we probably get into some marriage stuff, because how can you talk about parenting without some marriage? But yeah, our compromise is JC loves the dishwasher, the dishes done a certain way. So I will do them to the best of my ability. And if she comes behind me and changes it, I'm just fine with it. I'm not going to quit doing it. Right. Because it's still helpful. Right. But at the same time, I'm not going to get offended that she wants them in there a certain way. And she's not going to go, you're making this more difficult for me. She goes, thank you for trying. Yeah. And I'm like, because even if you tell me exactly how to do it,
I'm not going to do it that way.
I'm not going to do it that way, 100%.
But that takes work.
Oh, that took, again, 12 years of marriage. Yeah. Yeah. Catch us on the wrong day and somebody's mad about the dishes.
I know, it's such a big issue. I'm like, are you allergic to pans? Like, you did everything. I'm like, I'm so thankful for that. But also, there's that.
Also, this thing that has gunk on it.
Right. Well, even now, it was funny going off the dishes. I'll say bath time or dishes. He's like, good luck. I'll go do dishes. Yeah, it's like nobody wants to do bath time. I'm like, why'd I give you that option?
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's ours too. We always constantly try to trade off whatever it is.
Yeah, who wants the worst?
I'm like, do you want to walk the dog or do this? Or do you want to go to the store or do you want to do this?
Right. You both look at each other because you know that you want the other.
Yeah.
Like, I want the same thing. So.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some parenting. So, what are some ways that we can understand? Let's talk about the brain for a second. So I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, and I know you did too, is that we have, like all the things we just talked about, historically, parenting has just been kind of non-existent. There hasn't been this big conversation about parenting. And so I think we've talked about this on another podcast, but I'll dive into it some. But, 1950s is when child psychology came around, and we started looking at how the parents, the adults, affect the child through their relationship and through their system. And that's kind of blew into, Pavlov and all these different things that helped us look and see how do we control, essentially, our kids' behavior and outcome. Mm-hmm. And me and you would say that's really not how parenting's supposed to work.
We wish it did.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe it is effective to a degree, but like, what's the end result?
Exactly.
Like, what are you trying to get out of it?
But at that time, we didn't understand their brain.
Right.
We didn't understand how it functioned. We didn't understand the brain in general in an adult, much less a child. I mean, a few years earlier than that, we were literally cutting, soldiers' brains open in order to help them with PTSD. So we weren't very far from that when we defined the word parenting and started looking at it from a psychological perspective.
Right.
So since then, which hasn't been but 60, 70 years, we've learned more about the brain and been able to do MRIs and study and all these kind of things without having to cut into a kid's brain. Mm-hmm. So why is that important to understand? And then let's talk about what that looks like.
Okay. Our kids' brains work differently than ours because of just developmentally where they are. And so that's kind of like a no-brainer. I think we would all say, yeah, our kid, like, have you ever felt like you're talking to a wall? Like when you're like really telling your kid how they don't need to do something, they're like, so can I have applesauce? You're like, cool. Yeah. I don't think you heard anything I said because they didn't. Yeah. So I think we have these preconceived notions of how our kids should respond. And I think understanding their brains helps us know how to meet them where they are. And that doesn't mean they get to run all over us. They don't get to run everything. I think that's a core fear of specifically Christian parents. Like, I want to show that my kids can listen. Mm-hmm. They're respectful and they're obedient. They're obedient. Yeah. We want like little yes men and women. Yep. And I get that to an extent. Like, we want our kids to have respect for our elders. I mean, like, for the people, not for the parents, but let's understand how they work. So if you're going to look at the brain, and I know you've had this on the podcast several times, so this is kind of redundant, but
not at all.
Even looking at the whole brain child. They don't remember it. Yeah. It's like new information. Yep. The whole brain child really explains a lot of this. Like, as I was going through the book again, I was like, this is just such a good resource. Mm-hmm. You have the bottom part of your brain, it's your fight or flight. And that's actually that part in the right part of your brain, which is, your feeling, your emotions. Those are developing pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 0 to 5. Yeah. 0 to 4.
Right. And so that's fight or flight. That's intense emotions. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's why you have tantrums. Your left side's it's just not developing as fast. It really has an explosion. I mean, you're looking at those word explosions around, you have 2, 3, those why questions. They're trying to make sense of their world. Mm-hmm. You have the prefrontal cortex, which is going to be your reasoning. It's why, when you ask your teenager where their brain was at, they didn't have one. That prefrontal cortex was just not able to fully process, if I do this, then this will happen. Right. And that's not even fully developed till mid-20s. I know you said even with technology, that's probably even later. Yeah. Yeah, that's looking at 27, 28 and a lot of young adults. Yeah. And so if you look at that, it's like, I always tell clients this in terms of whenever my 3-year-old has a tantrum, never once have I been able to logically tell her why that was not okay and her come out of it. Like, say, Isabella, that's ridiculous. I can't believe you're doing that. She has never once popped up and be like, you're right. If only you had said that in a clearer way before, I think I would not have my tantrum, Yep. And so understanding their brain and like our brains in general, like this is the same across the board. You need to connect to the right brain first. And the research shows that literally will bring it down. It will calm it down to say, you're really mad right now, which is not your instinct as a parent to say that. Mm-hmm. Then you can come in with the logical side, the left brain side to say, hey, when you're mad, I'm wondering if you could can you come tell me what's going on with you? Like, to give them the words because they don't have the words. Yep. And so I think, we'll say they should know these things. Well, they don't. Right. And we've talked about this. Like, this is not something that they just know. So the discipline, the idea of teaching our kids and saying, hey, here's a good way of handling this to where you can get your needs met in a way that makes sense. Right. So go back to that word discipline, because I think as Christian parents especially, we
and we're not going to get into a whole spanking, no spanking situation. But even as I say it, the fact that that's the only thing that kind of weighs heavily on the discussion is what's frustrating to me.
Okay.
Right. The spanking part.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, that's what, when you say discipline, most people's brains jump to corporal punishment.
Right.
That's discipline. But the word discipline comes, from disciple, which the root word is disciple,
Right.
which means to teach.
Right.
And so we have to be able to teach our kids things
Right.
through the discipline.
Right.
So yes, we should discipline our kids for sure, and there should be a consequence for every action to some degree. Like I'm a huge proponent of, if you tell your kids something, always say, and this is going to happen if it doesn't.
Right.
Like, go over, look at them, make sure they're listening, and say, hey, if you grab the dog's ears again, you're going to have to take a time out, or you're going to lose your privileges with the dog, or you're going to have to go into the common corner, or you're going to have to do an extra chore.
Right.
So that when they do it, and you go over there and say, hey, what did we say? I was going to get in trouble. Yes.
Right.
Here's what's happening.
Right.
But so many times, and in my own life, I fail at this too, but so many times, you're like, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that, go to your room.
Right.
And they're like, I didn't know I was going to have to go to my room if I did that.
Right.
And in our heads, we're like, well, it shouldn't have mattered.
Right.
You should have known you shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
And know there's a consequence.
Right.
So
Yeah.
why isn't that right?
Why? Well, I think.
Well, let's not say right, but why is that not effective?
My first thought was they don't know what right looks like.
Yeah. And they also don't remember
Right.
the other 20 times you told them.
No, I mean, that's like, again, referring back to Anatomy of the Soul, like there's a reason why you have to tell your kids things over and over and over again. Like there are neural pathways that are literally trying to connect to understand something. So it's not that they are premeditatively like trying to be disobedient, which I think is how we can tend, like we think it's like something against us. They meant to do that.
Right.
They don't have that ability. That's a pretty high brain function to be able to know, if I do this, I will tick off my parents, and then it will be, then they're going to be so they're not thinking those things through.
Right.
They're literally like, this is fun.
Right. So the word, like when people say my kid's manipulative and they're 7,
Right.
they don't have a prefrontal cortex, so they can't do executive functioning, meaning they cannot think past their actions and their behaviors. Correct.
Right. And so even last night, this actually, we have my son Hayes he screams at us when he wants food. It's pretty effective, and also I'm like, oh, he's a baby. So he screams and I give him what he wants and it stops him. Well, my daughter's watching the whole interaction, who knows how to use her words. And 2 seconds later does the same exact thing as him. And that was actually a moment for me to be like, she saw it work. So I don't think it was, again, it was not a manipulative action. It was a cause and effect.
Yes.
I saw my brother do this and it worked. So I had to slow down and say, wait a minute. Okay. Hey, and technically Hayes is old enough. I say old enough. I can start to teach him those things. We both will say, Steve and I are like, he can understand what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
And so that's not to say he knows better. It's just he's in a position to take in some of that information. And so I had to slow down and say, okay, that was not okay for me to do that. I gave it to him when he screamed. Let's try to use our words. And so that was just, I think, one way that would have been easy to be like, no, you know better. You know how to use your words. Or like, you just want to get what you want.
Yep.
And it was, no, I saw him scream, so I want to see if it works.
Yeah, Jude's 4, and his whole thing is whining right now. He's like using the baby voice, and well, just doing that. And I'm trying to work really hard at not saying stop whining.
It's really hard because it's annoying.
Oh my gosh. Ugh. I want to tell him, you're being so annoying. He'll tell me that. This is so annoying. This is bored. Yeah, that's his new thing. So he doesn't know how to say boring.
Right.
So it's bored.
Right.
Everything is, this is bored. I don't want to watch your show. It's bored. And I'm like, oh
tough.
my gosh. You don't get to watch TV anyway. Get out of here. He's crazy. Anyway, but yeah, it's just, they have no concept of what's happening, and we project onto them these words. And I think the important part that I wanted to talk about this on the podcast was we have to change our language when it comes to parenting. And we can't keep using words like manipulative and they know better and discipline. It only means spanking because it doesn't encompass all that we now know about kids.
Right. And so even, coming from that of when I was at Play Therapy Conference back in October, one word that they used a lot, we talk about wanting our kids to be able to self-regulate, right? And that's even goals I'll set with clients. Like, you want to be able to regulate yourself because you're not able to do that. But
what's that mean?
Is being able, like, whenever you're overstimulated, you're overwhelmed, you know kind of how to bring yourself back down. But you wouldn't know how to, this is kind of where the conference came in, like, you wouldn't know how to do that unless you have experienced co-regulation.
Uh-huh.
You need another brain in the room to help you know how to kind of come back down off of that, because you don't know how to do that for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we do that for babies pretty easily. When they cry, we pick them up and hold them and feed them and have a need is met, and we are regulating with them. And so even as, you know,
which is attachment.
It's attachment,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's saying, I'm going to show up for you.
Yeah.
And I'm here, and you're safe,
Mm-hmm.
and you're loved. But that continues. Like, our, you know,
That doesn't
3-year-olds,
just happen with babies.
right? Our 3-year-olds need us to, like, help, you know, hold them, and literally, like, there's time that I'll breathe with my daughter, like, let's
Mm-hmm.
calm down. And so, you know, your teenager needs that. Like, even I think when I was reading Anatomy of the Soul, it's like we tend to think that our teenagers know how to do things, because they know how to do a lot, but their brains are making just as many connections and just as many changes as a toddler
Mm-hmm.
with sex hormones. So that's, you know, they're out of control. So they need someone to step in with them and help them understand what's going on inside of them, because that's not something you can do apart from another person.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I mean, that would go back to the gospel, you know, like who God is, of how he steps in with us and does life with us,
Yeah.
you know. So I think that's pretty, if I were to talk to parents about, like, how to help your kids, I think it's one is slowing down enough to help them regulate, help them understand what's going on inside of themselves before we immediately just want them to be these kids who automatically obey everything we say.
Right. And so why do we want that? Are we regulated?
I mean, our society's not regulated. That's
Right.
what you're asking.
That is what I'm asking. I'm pointing to the fact that as parents, when we're overtaxed, when we're stressed out, when our marriages we can't communicate with each other,
Mm-hmm.
when we're running around like crazy people and busy and stressed out, and especially during the holidays, you know, losing our minds,
Mm-hmm.
we have to first stop and realize, am I regulated?
Yeah.
You know, and what does that mean, right? It doesn't mean perfect, serene harmony. It can,
Mm-hmm.
but it means, how's my breathing?
Right.
What does my body feel like? Am I jittery? How many cups of coffee have I had this morning?
Right.
Right? Where's my anxiety and where's my stress, and what am I thinking about myself?
Mm-hmm.
Am I loving myself? Am I feeling secure? Am I feeling safe?
Right.
You know, is my view of God that he loves me and he's proud of me and pleased with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you needing to slow down
Yeah.
and take a minute to rest, or just, you know, go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and our kids pick up on that. They don't know how to state how we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but you will see your kids react similar to where you're at emotionally.
Yeah.
Kids tune in, whether they want to or not, to how their parents are.
Right, because that's literally their survival mechanism.
Right.
Because they, from a very young age as a baby, they're nursing, they're attaching, they're connecting, and that allows them to feel safe in the world and feel loved and survive and function.
Right.
I mean, for millions of years, an animal would have eaten them, or war would have broken out, or something would have happened. We, in the last 50 years, don't have that same risk.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we on one hand, if you're an older parent, sometimes they listen to this and they're like, ugh, all these emotions and all this stuff and whatever. It's like, yeah, we got to be honest. We have the benefit
Right.
and the hindsight to have the luxury and the comfort to be able to do this.
Right. Yeah. We're able to do that, which in some ways, because we have so much luxury, it's not good. You know,
Yeah.
That's like too much free time.
But we also only lived a very short amount of time for all of history too.
Right.
We didn't live till we were 85 or 82
Right.
or 90
Yeah.
for most of human history.
Yeah.
So our lifespan was much shorter. So the time to like have insight and have wisdom and have all these stages that we've developed in psychology over the last 50 years, I mean, it was never a thing.
Yeah. Vastly different.
Yeah.
And a lot of things we're talking through, you probably are like, parents are probably already doing some of them.
Uh-huh.
It's just to help. I think when you can put words to what you're doing, you can help pay attention to it a little bit better, instead of feeling like, you know, I'm always losing it, or I'm always frustrated, or I always feel overwhelmed. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that's whenever it's kind of, okay, what do you need to help you feel less overwhelmed? But you're probably slowing down to check, you know, when your kid hurts their knee, you're hugging them and helping them. It was just, this is kind of some ways just to put, like, if you can understand what's going on in the brain, you just know how to approach them a little differently, instead of just saying, hey, I need you to get up and suck it up, be a big girl,
Yeah.
and go get your shoes on.
Right.
You know, and so, which I've done.
Yeah. And there are times to do.
Yeah.
You don't, the best option, the ideal option is not to do that. Is to be able to
Right.
co-regulate and connect and attach and attune and then do the thing.
Right.
But sometimes you have to get your freaking shoes on and get in the car.
Right.
And so I tell people this all the time. I don't expect myself or you or anybody else to be a perfect parent, because you can't and live in the world. It's not a perfect world. What we're asking people to do is have enough insight and wisdom to do the right thing 7 or 8 out of 10 times.
Right.
Because there are times where most of the time you can stop and take the extra 30 seconds.
Right.
And it may only be that. Again, I want people to know, we're not saying sit down for 20 minutes.
They don't want you to. Kids do not want you sitting down for 20 minutes.
They may, if they're really escalated and really triggered and they have some trauma, it may take that, right? If you have a foster kid or you have an attachment issue that's broken, or there's been a death in the family, yes.
Yeah.
Those kids are going to need extra things than what the quote-unquote average kid, not that I think any of those exist, but the kid without significant trauma are going to need.
Yeah, that's a good point, because as, whoever may be listening to the podcast, especially foster adoptive parents, can feel like you don't understand. Like that.
We have to spend 45 minutes or 3 hours.
Well, because there's a real fight or flight mechanism there that you're having to calm down. Like even the idea of play.
And you're not their primary attachment figure usually.
No, and you're not, but you're also trying to develop that.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But you don't have the base.
No.
Yeah.
No, and even like, if you even look from I know this is kind of like a segue, but just to kind of include just this group in there that can probably feel pretty isolated. Even learning about play, that's a higher brain function that you can't do until you feel safe.
Right.
So like kids can't come into my playroom until they feel safe. So like what we may expect from kids, even from trauma, is just going to have to be time after time after time. So yeah, it is going to just take longer to do those things. So that's just say like that's there.
Yeah.
That's not to neglect that you may need to take more. That doesn't make it wrong or strange. It just means that when there's trauma in attachment wounds, it's going to take more work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to dovetail that in there, because there may be people who are like, oh yeah, I actually have to take this long. Right. Which again, that's part of stepping into the role you're playing as a foster or adopted parent, or a parent, a second parent, or a grandparent of a kid, or whatever the situation is that your life has to look differently. And our culture doesn't adapt to that with you and for you, and that makes it really hard.
Right.
That you can't say, well, we were 30 minutes late because he got triggered by car seat, or he got triggered by this thing, or there was no food, or whatever the issue is.
Right. Right. And I mean, even in that, it's kind of like, and you don't have an end in sight with that. I mean, in parenting in general, you don't, but especially when there's trauma, there's not like an end date of like when that won't feel like as much of a trigger. Yeah. Or when they're going to feel safe. So it's just, you're sticking with it and hoping that your community can come alongside you with it and not make you feel like less of a parent, because it doesn't look like like a typical child.
100%. So back to the brain. So we're talking about you have to be self-regulated. And so kind of how does that, so 0 to 3, 0 to 4, the kids got right brain development, emotions, art, language, fantasy, and then their prefrontal, their left brain starts coming online 3.5, 4, but not fully really online until about 4.5, 5. And then what happens?
It's a really good question. Like it continues to develop. They're trying to make sense of their world and all of that. So what that means, and so the idea of integration is you're trying to help integrate their brain to take all those pieces that are coming online and put them together. So what that means is, I think we don't tell our kids stuff because we don't think they can understand it. Yep. But they're picking up on stuff, right? So, but they're going to make their own conclusions, just like we all have. That's why, this must have been my fault. No, it wasn't. But you didn't know any different. So what that means is when, like if we have a fight and they see it, it's kind of like, okay, mommy and daddy were upset with each other. And, because they notice, and it was not okay for mommy to act this way. And so, but I apologize and we love each other. And we, like to help, I like to connect the dots in it for them. So you're trying to integrate the brain in a way that's like, hey, you're safe. You're okay. There's the bottom part. Your right side of like, let me tell you what you're feeling. Like that might have been scary for you. But let me help you understand what that meant. And then to kind of carry it a step further of like, but here's what we know to be true in it. And so just the idea of that's ultimately what we want for our children, is to have a integrative brain that can bring all those parts in. So it's not just dominant in one section. And so you're going to continue to do that. And so you're going to think, my 6-year-old really doesn't know that they're going to go to, that school starts next week. We're just going to jump into it. It's like, it might be good to probably walk through, hey, this is probably what this is going to look like. You know, when you notice some emotions, let me label that for you. Let me put some words to it. And just, that just kind of, one, develops the relationship between you, and then it does really great things for their brain. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what else you were looking for.
No, it was good. Well, I just think people, you know, we tend to can talk about our kids' age and younger. And so.
For sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, even saying that is like, that's, with that middle school age, that high school age, one thing that, you know, we talk about play therapy, and we talk about why that's so good, especially from, you know, 2, 3 to 12, right? Mm-hmm. But even with your kids who basically play therapy, I've even done some filial therapy with my own daughter of like, you know, at home, I'll take 20 minutes and she gets to lead it. And it's been really good for us, especially when she has a day where she is just not doing well, which I typically don't want to spend time with her then.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to take away our playtime. That's not healthy. It's not good.
Nope.
And so we spend time together, and it does something different for us. Okay, so if we were to take that and put that into a context of a middle schooler or high schooler, they still need that, but it's going to look different. And so it's like, the idea of integrating even the brain and understanding it is they need experiences kind of with you, and especially, what does it look like to give them some, you know, an opinion in it? What does it look like for them to lead it? And so kids don't get a whole lot of choices.
Right.
And so how do we help them do that? So, you know, is it baking cookies together? Is it going for a bike ride together? Is it fixing something together? And so I know you weren't saying specifically like what are things you could do, but I just think as a parent, and I don't have kids this age range, but in terms of what I've learned about how you can connect with them, that's just a really good way to maybe slow some time down. So it's not just, oh, they're on their phone in their room apart from me and I don't know how to connect.
Right.
It's getting them out and saying, we're going to spend 20 minutes together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something we're going to do that's going to be just good for y'all in general, but it's going to be something that their brain needs that they don't know it.
Yeah, I think parents, they think the things that take a lot of time, it's being intentional more than it is time. Mm-hmm. You know, that it's like, I want to show you that you're what matters, mm-hmm. and then I want to connect with you.
Right.
But I think one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years with clients, but in general, is being an authentic parent too. Mm-hmm. Right. So we always say the 3 A's that kids need are attachment, attunement. So attachment meaning connection, attunement meaning I see you, I'm with you. Mm-hmm. Affirmation, mm-hmm. right? Hey, I love you. You're amazing. Affection, physical, you know, mm-hmm. attention. But they also need authenticity, and that means, hey, I need a break. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, I'm not going to do this right now. Go play upstairs by yourself. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, you're going to have to figure that out, mm-hmm. you know, because I got something going on. And as they get older, there's this dance of, you know, they're really young. They need everything all the time. Mm-hmm. We feel like that, and then they literally do. Mm-hmm. They need you to wipe their butt. They need you to change the diapers. They can't feed themselves. Right. And I think, we're going back to husbands and wives or dads and moms, like, I think the thing about those roles that's so unique is that, and again, it's on a spectrum, but for the most part, if I had them, they would probably starve. I wouldn't pay attention to when they needed to eat. Like, things would be very chaotic because I wouldn't pay attention as much. Mm-hmm. But also, like, they would learn to regulate better sooner and earlier. They would probably be a little bit more independent. Mm-hmm. If JC has them or mom has them, a lot of times all those needs are going to get taken care of, but mm-hmm. they can end up being more dependent mm-hmm. over time as they get older. Right. And it's this dance of neither one's wrong, mm-hmm. but it's working together as a couple mm-hmm. in each moment to figure out how do we do this best for them, not for my feelings. Right. Right. Especially, not with what I feel comfortable with. Right. Which is a huge thing as a parent. Like, what am I making decisions on because I feel good about it, not because my kid needs it? Exactly. You know? And man, that's hard. Well, I mean, because even think about your 16-year-old who wants a license, and you're like, well, you're not ready. Well, who's not ready? They legitimately may not be ready. Right. That's not to say that they're not. They've hit every, tree in the driveway. Right. But there is, like, even as you're saying, like, older, there's going to be a fight for independent autonomy. Like, that's good. That's healthy. Like, you want that. But that's hard to let go of because you did just spend so much time literally doing everything for them. Oh, yeah. Like, blood, sweat, and tears. And then I'm supposed to let them go. Like, as a mom, I'm like, I even watch shows now of somebody graduate, I'm already crying. It's mm-hmm. like, no, please don't let that happen. And I think that even as a dad, though, but like to say, like, no, they can do this. Like, I remember my dad had a certain amount of confidence we could do things. Mm-hmm. And you can go off on your own, but we needed that. Whereas I'm sure my mom would have been like, no, you sure? You sure you don't need me to bring you somewhere? Because she wants to spend time with us. And mm-hmm. But like you were saying, they're not
bad things, but they have their own place, and understanding where your kid's at, of, okay, how do you develop their sense of autonomy in that they can be trusted, they can make good choices, maybe within reason.
Better.
Yeah. And so, but like, they need to develop their confidence and ability to do that.
But they also need to fail.
Right.
As they get older, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, through high school, they need to have opportunities to fail and screw up and skin their knee and see that they can't do it and that they're not the center of the universe.
Right.
Early on, they need to feel like it.
Right.
I mean, they need that attachment. They need to be the center of the universe. But as they develop, they have to learn independence and self-regulation.
Right.
Not co-regulation.
Yeah.
Co-regulation always is needed. We always need to connect with other people.
Right.
But at some point, right, they need to start learning to self-regulate.
Yeah. And how to have empathy for other people and look
Right.
outside of themselves. Like all those things are needed, and they can fail, but in a safe environment. It's like, how can, like, I think we will get so scared of our kids failing, and I can only imagine once you're like really launching them out. But if they can fail when there is a little bit of a safety net, and that's not to say you're going to, when I say safety net, it's saying you're there to help them work through it, not to save them from it.
Yeah.
Meaning, if they make a mistake, that's kind of to be expected.
Yep.
Because they're still, like, they're humans. I think we forget that. Like, they are little humans who will, like, I think if we enter parenthood with, they're just going to mess up. And not.
Yeah. Their base is screwing up.
Yeah.
We have to teach them to do the right things.
Right.
We try to talk about this all the time, but like, if they lie, if they do something, if they're rough, if they do something, whatever, it's like, well, they're supposed to do that.
Right.
And now we're
Right.
supposed to teach them not to.
Right.
Instead of, they come out as this little non-lying robot, and when they lie, it's a mistake.
Right.
It's no. The fact that they don't lie all the time is a miracle. That they tell you any truth ever means they trust you and their safety and their security and there's attachment.
Right.
If they're lying to you all the time, you might want to check yourself and your relationship with them.
And why they would feel the need to.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even just the idea of allowing your kid a redo. I know, like, learning this of, when our kids mess up, we're like, I can't believe you did that, and here's the punishment. But they never got a chance to know what the right way looked like. So even last night when my daughter's not doing what I asked, which she actually did, like I was at, specifically, like, this is what I need from you. It was not happening. So I just went ahead and put her in bed. It was bedtime. So she's crying. Then she's talking like this baby voice. It's not going well. And I'm even like wanting to discipline, like, you should have known. And I know not to do this, but I'm like, I'm going to use all my words to tell you why this was not okay. And finally I stopped. I was like, can we do a redo? And she was like, no. Like, you don't know what I'm talking about. I was like, do you want to try this again? And she said, mm-hmm. So it's like, we got out of bed. I had her literally be on the ground like she was. It's like, okay, can you please get up and I can carry you into bed? And she did it. And I was like, wow, that was really good. Like, how you listened the way that I asked you to, and I was able to carry you like you wanted. And so my husband was right there, he was like, that was so good how you listened. But it's like, even in that, that was the first time I've done that. It's not, and that's something I will do in the playroom. It's like, not my go-to.
Yeah.
But it gave her a chance to say, okay, this is how it could have gone. It didn't go well the first time, and nobody was really learning from it.
Right.
I was just, I'm frustrated. She's like crying. Nothing is good about the situation. And so, but it was like, this is a way to teach you what it can look like and what I'm asking of you. Because I don't even think she knows what obey means, even though we've told her.
Of course not.
Like we've said, like, this is what it means, but even that's like an abstract concept.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
7 and 8 and 9, it's still an abstract concept.
Right.
Like, again, I think that's where parenting is really hard, and it takes a lot of people and a lot of support, and it takes a good marriage, and we don't have very much of that in our culture. We don't have a lot of support anymore. We don't have a lot of good marriages. We don't have a lot of good communication between spouses, and so then we want the quick, easy fix, and there's just not any with kids.
No, you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and also it's the shortest time of your entire life.
Yeah.
You have, we had kids when we were 30 something, 31. I was 31. So I had 30 years. And if I count 18 to 30, right, I had, what is that? I'm terrible at math. 12 years. No. Yes, 12 years on my own to do whatever I wanted to watch however many movies I wanted to do whatever I wanted to get my stuff together however I wanted to. And then I had kids.
Yeah.
And now I still get to do some of that, but for a large majority of it, even if you have healthy kids, that gets put to the wayside.
Oh, yeah.
But then 10, 12, 13, 14, they're always your kids, but you start getting some freedom and some independence, and they do their own thing and they don't want you. So the time of like them being dependent on you and needing you and being close with you. I know Chip's probably over there crying because he's got older kids, but it's gone so fast. Right. And I'm trying to remember that right now in every moment when I'm frustrated or tired or whatever. We were talking about that with Jude's 4. And right now he's just still this little, he's a baby, but he's kind of bigger. And I was telling JC last.
He's still a baby, but he's bigger.
I
get that. Yeah.
It's like he's got these squishy cheeks still, and he still has these funny ways of saying things. And
like, don't ever change.
But man, I know now that I've had an older kid that is gone in the next year.
Right.
And then the next year from 4 to 6, I mean, it's baby stuff is gone.
Yeah.
And Grady's 7, and the ship is totally gone on being a baby.
Yeah.
He's little. He's still a little kid. But the baby cute stuff and the sweetness and the softness and all that, it's gone. And
like looks like a kid. Like, he's a kid.
Yeah. No baby. And it's like, oh man.
Yeah. How did that happen?
I don't want to lose that. And yet I also want that to get the heck out of my house.
Yeah.
And there's this tension.
Right. We look at pictures like a year ago and we're like, oh man, like how did that?
Who are these kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just, and as parents, you know that, like you see it happen. And that's why there can be, we've talked.
Well, I want to challenge people who don't know that. I think that's my point, is that we're mindful of this because we're clinicians and we work all the time. And I'm sure there are lots of other parents who are.
Right.
But if you're frustrated and you have little kids and you're listening to this, man, be mindful that it is, literally think about how short of a time period it is in your entire independence life. Like if you're frustrated with time or date night or movies or vacations or whatever it is, this time is so small and so short that making your kids a priority and attaching and attuning will pay off dividends for the rest of their life, while then you get to do whatever you want to as an adult again. Right. So you got to do it before for all of your life, and you got to be a kid and be dependent on, hopefully, and then you'll get to do that for 40 years in your marriage after your kids are out of your house.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I said we know that, it's just the idea of there can be two of those things at once, like to hold that of this won't be forever. It's like, today when my daughter's asking me to pound it and high fives and kiss, hugs before I leave, and I'm late. I'm always late. But it's like, she's not going to always ask for that. So I want to take the time to do that, and then not guilt yourself if 1 out of 10 times you don't do it, because that's the balance. Right. Well, because usually she's standing in the doorway, like trying to help me. It's not helpful. She's like, let me open the door for you. Don't worry about it. Get out of the way. You're going to fall down the steps and you're going to cry, But and then I have to co-regulate. There's just so many steps. That's exactly. I'm like, I didn't know that one person tripping could make me so frustrated. But that's why I get frustrated, is because I'm like, I told you 20 times to leave the dog alone. He's going to bite you. And it's not him biting you that's the problem. It's you're going to cry. Right. I have to stop doing what I'm doing, come over there and soothe you. Right. It's a process. And then teach you a lesson about the dog again. It's a 30-minute process. And then you're going to do it again. Yeah, in literally 5 seconds. like this conversation never happened. Every shirt that my kids have, my wife is so mad about this. Every shirt, literally almost every shirt, and I'm not kidding, I'd say 80% of them have one little hole from the dog nipping the back of their shirt. And no matter what you do, no matter what consequences you do, when they're in front of that dog, they forget that they were crying because he bit them, as a puppy. So squishy. Just Jude, literally, I'm like, don't grab the dog's tail, buddy. Hey, buddy, do not grab the dog's tail. I turn, I get some water. I turn, like he's grabbing the dog's tail, looking at me, laughing. I go, it's not funny, but also it's funny. I go over there, I'm like, dude, look at me in the face. I said, if you touch the dog's tail again, you're going to have to go sit and, do a time in or whatever. Okay. I turn around at least 2 minutes, and he's got the dog's tail. I see him run, but I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to go and enforce this stupid rule that I set. Right. There's like a computing issue. Yeah. We're kind of like, that's where I think as all parents, whenever we label things like disobedient, or which I guess like they are not obeying, like that is disobedient. But like when I hear that it's like an intentional act. Exactly. There is literally nothing in that story. Like I understand what you're saying, because I've been, we've all been there. We're like, I literally don't think they understand the words coming out of my mouth. They don't. They don't, Or they did know, and then whatever's in front of them is shinier and bigger and nicer than the ability to hold the consequence. Right. And the reason why. Right. And the idea that I might be upset or put out. Yeah. None of that's going on in their brain. No. So it's not an intentional act towards you. So that's just where it just takes the patience as a parent to follow through on the consequence. Okay, so now we have to go sit and like take some time away from the dog until we can learn this, but doing that over and over. Like it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, because you have to do it over and over and over again. Exactly. And also you have to take some responsibility and going, I got the freaking dog. Like I'm the adult, the idiot,
who agreed, and my wife will say, that she didn't want it, but her and the boys talk. I mean, I'm like, babe, you were on Instagram looking at dogs, and like you put a deposit down before you even talked to me.
You have
about
like your data of like when it all happened, like on
it.
January.
100%. Yeah, I was
You
like,
were on Instagram.
no dogs. Yeah, and she's like, oh, I put a deposit down. She's like, it's refundable. I mean, I just put it down just in case, and I'm like, oh, but I wanted the dog.
But our kids, their hopes and dreams would be crushed if you
And
take the deposit back.
we got in a good fight because we were talking about this dog, and I said before we got it, I was like, what's going to happen? We're gonna get the dog, and then every day I'm gonna hear about how terrible the dog is and how crazy it is and how much it makes our life miserable. And she's like, well, of course you are, but it's still gonna be good for us. And I'm like, she's like, just know you're gonna have to listen to me complain about it.
You're like, we already know what's gonna happen.
I'm like,
the dogs.
Okay, I agree to this scenario, knowing what's gonna happen and trusting that it's gonna be better.
Right. Yeah, we got 2 dogs before we got married. Not married, before we had kids.
Yeah.
It was after first year of marriage, and Steven's like, if I only knew what I was agreeing to.
Oh gosh.
I was like, they do a lot of good things for me. I feel like my life is better. And he was like, I'm happy to hear that. It'll never happen again.
That's what I said too. And then, after the few miscarriages and having a, 4 and 7-year-old and feeling like, I remember being a little kid and getting our first dog, and when I was probably 7. And just, I loved having a dog and connecting with it and attaching with it and playing with it and taking responsibility for it and feeding it and walking it and all those things. So it's far better. And our dog's amazing. He is such a good dog compared to our other dogs that we've ever had. But it's just another thing to take care of.
It's another thing.
And so some days it's like, why did we do this?
Yeah. Yeah, when I have all 4 of them in the house, I'm like, 2 of you got to go outside. I mean, it's the dogs.
Yeah, whatever. 2 of you, either 2 dogs or a dog and a kid.
However y'all want to work this out, between y'all, 2 of you go outside.
Yeah,
I need
2 of you children.
Right, the dogs clean up on the floor, so maybe I want to keep them inside.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so that's just to say there's chaos all around, and it makes sense why you might be overwhelmed as a parent.
Absolutely. All right, so what are some things that are different? I guess we'll get into kind of a little bit of discipleship, and as a parent, when it comes to discipline, meaning discipleship, meaning teaching, what are some things that are maybe different from a Christian worldview? How to talk about this? Let's see. Let's break down what we mean by that, and then what's different from the world. So I'll help you out with it.
Thanks. You're gonna kind of lead it. You're like, I'm thinking this through as I say it.
Yeah. What I mean is as I was saying it, I'm like, oh, that's so hard. Because I think, again, it goes
sounds
back.
weighty.
Well, yeah. Well, it goes back to this idea of like discipleship and Christian parenting in general, because it's like so much of what we've learned as young adults and young parents is it's only this thing. And what we're trying to show people is that it's all of this attaching and attuning and connecting. And so when Jesus, I think, was talking about children and dealing with children, he was encompassing all that we're talking about.
Right.
We only talk about it from a behavior standpoint.
Right. Yeah.
And so God, I mean, ultimately the gospel says our behaviors are not what God cares about as much as our heart posture.
Right. And what flows out of the heart.
Yes.
You see in your
behaviors.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we see our kids, like, well, we have to go, these behaviors are reflective of their heart posture. But as a 3-year-old, as a 5-year-old, as a 7-year-old, as a 10-year-old, can I expect their heart posture to be a fully developed, mature, spiritual, sacrificial, selfless thing? No. Yeah. If they're doing it more than half the time, that's amazing.
Right. Yeah. Even as you're saying that, it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of actually rewired my own brain. I'm like, you're right. And how God approaches us is just like, I was even texting my mom last week. I'm really glad that, because she was sending me some really sweet things about how to like kind of come before the Lord, like Abba Father, and like how he cares for us. And, as we wait for things on him, and I said, I'm really glad that he doesn't turn around saying, I'm working on it, which is what I feel like I do to my kids. I'm like, I am working on it. If you would just trust me for a minute. And I feel like he's so much sweeter in that. He's like, I got this. I don't picture him being frustrated that I'm
questioning.
Yeah. But yet, I mean, granted, I do ask all the why questions. It's just not over and over and over and over again.
Why God?
I did it to my daughter last night. She smiled at me. Didn't faze her.
She don't care.
No. I was like, I just want you to taste of your own medicine. But how God just responds to us, I think, helps us know how to respond to our kids, of just this idea of, okay, can I slow down enough just to kind of see where you are, how you're doing, how can I lead you in this? And you can trust me.
Well, yeah, because God is fully regulated.
Right.
He doesn't need anything. And I think that's what we have to learn as parents is God has given us the ability to connect with him, connect with our spouses, connect with other people, connect with the Holy Spirit in order to know that we're loved, know that we're safe, and be secure in that.
Right.
And the more we walk in that peace and that understanding, the outpour of our own behaviors and actions is going to be to our kids.
Right.
But when we're misbehaving, when we're yelling, when we're frustrated, when we're short, when we're wanting them to just shut up and leave us alone, it's because of something going on in our own heart. And if we don't realize that, man, I'm trying to get my kid to behave so I feel okay,
Right.
we're going to be dead in the water.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a scary place to be in some ways of like, if our kid misbehaves, especially like in a school setting. And I've even thought like, whoa, I was worried about how I was going to be viewed in that.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't worried about my kid. I mean, I was to an extent, but I was like, I was realizing it said more about me. And so I think that even...
Or church.
Yeah. Or it's like, we have the obedient kid. We have the kid who listens.
That means we're good parents.
Yeah. That's exactly what you equate it with. And so, and not that you want your kid just like, kicking the teacher and saying no, you know what I mean? And so like there is middle ground there. But even if like you were to look at like our own spiritual lives, we would never expect any Christian to be where they needed to be in their Christian walk. Be like, oh, you haven't arrived yet? Like God's like, you're not there yet?
Well, not as a mature Christian anyway.
Yeah. Not to be like, I can't believe what's wrong with you. Like, get your crap together.
Right.
Like it's with our kids, though, could we slow down and say, hey, you're learning? And yes, is it frustrating because we are human and it's going to take time for us to like slow down enough to understand the frustration in ourselves. But to not automatically assume that our kids are just willfully trying to do the opposite of everything we're doing. They do have that in them. They have sin. So there is a will. There's a will developing without a moral development there. Does that make sense?
No, that's real good.
So they do have pushback. So when your kid looks at you and does the opposite, that is definitely their will. I don't know if that moral sense can really be applied to it.
Yeah, I would say biblically no, because it's kind of the conversation of it makes people mad, but it's kind of the conversation of do kids go to heaven when they die? And I think there's an age of accountability that comes in. King David, when he does what he does and his son dies, it says that he will see his son in eternity in heaven. And so we have these kind of concepts that there's not a moral choice in denying God and being quote unquote disobedient until you can know that you're doing it.
Right.
So there is some developmental connection for each individual. It's different, I think. But if they don't know any better, yes, they're sinful and yes, their base is sin, but their accountability and what they have to pay for that is different.
Right. So to kind of go back to your...
Does that make sense?
No, it does. I mean, because even put in that context, everybody would say, oh, well, of course not. Like, of course they wouldn't have a sense of being able to accept Jesus.
Right.
Like, of course they would go to heaven. But we would be quick to say that, but we're quick to say they meant...
They shouldn't have touched the candle that was on the table for the 20th time.
Yeah. And so I think to go back to your question of like from a Christian perspective, you're bringing in a lot of different layers to it in some good ways, but it's almost coming back to why do we want these things for our kids? So like, why do we bring scripture in? Why do we bring them to church? Why do we want them to behave towards people? It's like I was telling clients, some parents yesterday, like, you want your kids to listen to their teachers because their teachers care about them, not because they're just a teacher.
Yes.
They want what's best for you. Hopefully, not every adult does.
Yeah, so do you, okay, so do you want them to care for their teachers if they don't know what's best for them? No. And I want my kid to be able to discern that as they go through life. I don't want them to be blindly obedient to adults or parents or teachers and just trust everything they do.
Right.
I want them to be able to understand that. But they cannot do that under 7, under 8, under 9.
Right.
And so it's our job to be involved in those relationships, to be connected to those relationships, and for us to regulate the safety of those people.
Right.
And then, yes, if we know they're safe, we expect our kids to trust.
Right.
But they can't blindly trust. And so there's this like dance and navigation through that where it's us still being heavily involved in everything and helping them co-regulate and helping them find safety.
Right. Yeah. And that, mom and dad can be trusted.
Yes.
So if they're trusting the adults right there, then I can also trust. And that means that we can respect them and listen to them. But it's okay for them to ask questions. It's okay for them to, like, so just those things that think, do we have our kids, memorize scripture because it looks good, to do that, or because it's really going to be something that takes hold of their heart.
Yeah.
So that whenever they are out in a world that does not believe in who God is, that's what will come up, that they will come up against things.
Yeah. We talk about doing the right thing all the time when you're not being seen.
Yeah.
That's a big thing we're talking about right now with Grady. Like, I don't want you to just do the right thing because it's the right thing, because the behavior's right.
Right. I
want you to do it because it makes you feel good, and you know in your heart that it's the right thing.
Right.
And that you're pleasing God when you do it. God's pleased with you anyway.
Right.
He's not disappointed in you if you mess up. However, by doing these behaviors and loving other people, you're doing things that make the world better.
Right. Right. And so that's a way better reason than just because I said so.
Oh, yeah. Which you have to have that conversation 100 times.
Yeah. Which I have said just because I said so. You do reach your limit.
Definitely. I've said it this week.
I'm like, unless I go into the anatomical parts of why this is happening, I can explain this to you any further.
That's right.
So I'm not sure that fully kind of answered your question. You were answering it too, though, in the middle of it. It's just like, as Christian parents, I think our own walk with the Lord, as we were saying about our own stuff, is reflected in how we also got our kids in it. And so how are all those things coming together to produce integrative kids who know we want to listen to God because of who he is and how he cares for us, not because you just do it.
Yeah.
And we go to church just because. And I think that that's a little bit of a shift. I've noticed, I'm hoping that there's a shift in our culture and how we talk about that. I don't think we have the luxury anymore to just say because anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're actually going to have to stand up for, like, no, we're doing this for these reasons, because not everybody's a Christian anymore.
No, for sure. And I think, and even the people who would say on a checklist, I am a Christian, what's the fruit look like in their life, and how's that different from the world? And we've got to be very different. We've got to do things very different. We've got to parent different. Our kids have to look different. Their responses have to be different. And that's not just in a I'm behaving well kind of way. Right.
Yeah. It's like you said, an outflowing of your heart to say, like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, to understand that part, and I hate to say God is a resource for my kids, but I want them to know to go to him.
Oh, 100%. I tell Grady, and I love doing it now. I hated doing it in the beginning. But at night, we'll lay there and I'll say, I love you so much. And he's like, I love you more. And I'm like, that's impossible. We say the same thing over and over. And he's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, yes, you'll understand one day when you have a kid, that you can't love me more than I love you. And then I say, who loves you more? And he'll say, God, Jesus, and so I'll say, what does that mean? And we talk through it. But I want if I die tomorrow in a car wreck, for him to know that there's something bigger than me, that my goal for him is not to make good grades, to perform, to, work a certain job, to become a counselor, to that's not my ideal for him. My ideal for him is to chase Jesus, understand what that means, not just this religious idea, but like, how does that play into every facet?
Right.
And so, so with discipleship, what's that look like for you when it comes to teaching them about Jesus? Because growing up, and in a lot of families, it's like we read the Bible, we do a little Bible story, we go to church, and that's kind of it, and that's discipleship. Yeah. But how do we integrate that into our parenting, into all this psychology and therapy and all this kind of stuff?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, I don't probably do all of it. If I'm being completely honest,
none of us do all of it.
Well, I think that in general, like, I'm still on autopilot with, they're still so young, I don't know how to bring those parts in. So, like, we pray before bed, and we talk about God, and kind of like, we talk about if we're worried, can we pray, can we ask God to help us? But it's not like when she comes home from church with like a piece of paper, and I'm like, hey, what did you learn? We're not really diving into it. So even as you're saying, I'm like, well, there's probably some pieces we could pick up.
Yeah.
That would be like, she knows I read my Bible. Like, just things that like our kids will see us do.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do we engage with God? But so, it's a good question for me to think about.
Yeah.
In terms of not really fully doing, like, I know it's kind of part of what we do, but in terms of being very explicit with it, of like, this is why we're doing it. And really fully talking about God as this idea of like, this is what he does and why we believe in him.
Yeah, it's much harder.
You know?
I mean, yeah, you have 3.5-year-old. It's much harder. It's about the time to kind of get into it.
Yeah, it's more of those things if she's just seeing it in our daily life, not because we've explicitly told her.
Right.
But that also takes awareness. Like, I mean, for you to say that's like, okay, that's actually good for me to hear. It's like, okay, how do I slow down enough to really, how do we both, Steve and I, like slow down and say, okay, this is what we would want you to learn? Because we both have said, from the beginning, our kids are going to learn about God from us primarily.
Yeah.
The church is a good support, but they're not who should, like, we don't send our kids to church and be like, well, I hope you got your daily dose.
Yeah.
Or like your weekly dose or whatever it is. Like, it will be from us.
Yeah.
And so I think discipleship right now in our families, we include her. And I say her like I don't have a second. He's just so young. No. The baby.
You'll do that for a long time.
Right. You're like, oh, yeah. There's that second one.
I'm like, great. When Grady gets older and we do this thing, I'm like, well, Jude will be literally 17 when he's 20. So it's not like he's going to be far behind.
Right. Like we forgot to pay, we paid for daycare. We forgot to sign the checks for daycare for Hayes. We're like, oh, yeah.
That one.
That one. But I think even discipleship, I would say for us, I know this can probably, it seems like they don't connect, but we include our kids in what's happening in our lives and tell them what's going on. So when hard things happen in our family, we include them in it. And they don't understand it, but it's kind of like when we can trust the Lord that He's going to take care of us.
Yeah, but that's huge. I think you're minimizing that. I'm saying those are, in that age group especially, that is a huge thing to do, is just, God's got us. Who is God in these situations? How's the world work? And help them to be involved in it. Their little brains, at that age can understand it, but that's going to lead into, because what I was focusing on and thinking about is what I think we should be doing is just the daily ins and outs of life in who are these friends at school?
Yeah.
And if there's a bully, or if there's somebody you don't like, or if there's somebody that's different than you, just constantly talking normally.
Right.
Like you would to anybody. I mean, hopefully like you would do your friends and your peers and your people at church and your Bible study. I mean, I guess this goes to the average maturity of just everybody.
Right.
But like, we have to be teaching them about what would Jesus say about those things, not from a behavioral focus.
Right.
Hey, don't say bad words. Hey, don't do these things.
Right.
But the why.
Right.
In the, if somebody's mean at school, to be able to say, hey, listen, that kid, right, the first couple hundred times, that kid doesn't have the same family we have, and they might not have the same views that we have, and they might not be learning all the things that you're learning, but what he does and says about you has nothing to do with who you are. He's having a bad day.
Yeah.
How when we have a bad day, we say things that we shouldn't say? Have you ever said anything to Daddy that you don't mean? You remember when you told Daddy, I hate you? You're a bad daddy.
Do you remember
you
that?
Little, like, do you remember that?
Yeah.
I'm going to flick his ear. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, do you remember that time, the 100th time you told Daddy, you're not a good daddy because I didn't let you do this? Did you mean that? No. Well, why did you say that? Oh, I was upset.
Yeah.
Well, if we teach them to regulate, if we're regulated and then we teach them to regulate, and we give them over the course of 2 years old to 3 years old to 5 years old to 7 years old, 100 language references and experience points and all these things of going, oh, I know myself enough,
right,
then I know other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of what I want. And I know you know this because we talk about it all the time, but from a therapeutic standpoint, from a church standpoint, from a parenting standpoint, if we understand our own story in the context of God and His grace and His mercy, then we can extend that to other people.
Yeah.
And we have to teach our kids that extremely early.
Yeah. Even as you're saying, I'm like, oh, I do that. Like, those are things I do.
I know you do that.
But it's also one of those things, I mean, even for parents who are like, oh my gosh, am I not doing all the things? Like, you probably are. I just think it takes, the day-to-day is going so fast. It's like Isabella telling me she was noticing another girl had longer hair in her class, or that she was told they're not her friend or something. My first thought was, who do I call? Right. I'm like, nope, stay out of it. Yeah. Like, allow your kid to work it out. But it does. I mean, what you're saying is when they bring those things to us, how do we have those conversations with them that says, no, like you're so great the way you are. Like, I know you're noticing somebody else has this and you kind of want that, but I love who you are. And just understanding their identity in it.
Yeah.
But then, like you're saying, I mean, even that next level of even to understand from the other person's perspective. So how do we teach them, even with their siblings? Like when she's like, he hit me. It's like, right, and it hurt. And I think it was an accident. How you have an accident? And so, but he's, we'll still have him say sorry. Whatever it is, but leading them through that, yeah. I didn't even think about that. Like, that's still the daily discipline.
Right. And it's discipleship if you tie it back to a biblical truth or a biblical story, or how God's given us grace or mercy.
Right.
Or even how, I'll say, well, that, I know that you were disobedient just now, but Daddy's disobedient too.
Right.
And I was probably disobedient a few times today, and I have to pray and I have to ask for forgiveness.
Right.
And I'm like, you're already forgiven. Grady and I have this conversation a lot. I'm like, Jesus already died. You already, he asked for Christ to come into his heart last year. And, we're still in that, like, me and my other buddy, it's the same kind of thing. We're like, is this real? And I believe it is real.
It's real.
But I believe it needs discipleship and continued.
Build on it.
Yeah. It's kind of like that the seed that lands on the sidewalk or in the thorns or in good ground. Like, they would all take root if we do something with them. But if you don't do the story is,
Right.
if you don't do anything with them and make sure they stay in the good, they're not going to sprout.
Right. And all that takes intentionality.
Yes, and time and energy.
Yeah. But, and I think it's easy, if we were to pair it with our culture is pretty zoned out. We've all been on our phones,
Oh, yeah.
I love to monitor Steven's phone intake. Like,
Oh, yeah.
why are you on it? And not my own. But, like, it's just easy to check out. And I think as parents, we're like, we deserve this. Like, we're tired.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's very true. But
Or I was only on it for a few minutes.
yeah, right. And so, but in some ways, that to give some, really, this is like a plus for like the generations before, so they didn't have all the distractions. Like, yeah, they may have been surviving, but they actually might have been better at just being aware of what was happening.
I think so.
In front of them. And so for us, like you're saying, from a Christian perspective, how do we put down the distractions and be aware and intentional about the things going on and not just checked out to it and then really confused why our kids are so resentful of us in like 15 years.
Yeah. The new stat is the average family is face-to-face with their kids less than 5 hours a week.
Wow.
And on a device 16.3 hours a day.
Yeah.
So how are we connected and attuning and doing any of these things if we're on our phone?
Right.
And that I mean, it's easy. I do it too. I mean, I'll be on the couch looking at something while the kids are playing next to me, or
Yeah. We're like, oh, they're busy.
yeah. But they know when you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
They know when you have your phone in your hand, when you're not fully focused, when you're not present.
Right.
So you have to learn to put this sucker in the closet somewhere, in a cabinet somewhere, and leave it.
Right. Well, and it's scary when your 3-year-old asks for her fake cell phone that she wants to hold and look at while she watches a movie. I'm like, no, that's not how this works.
Right.
It's fake. It's not real. But the fact that you've probably seen us do multiple things with electronics at the same time is a little alarming.
Oh yeah.
And so, it's just that takes a lot of work because there is an addictiveness to cell phones and to electronics, just all of it. And so can we kind of resist that and know we're doing this so we can create some really, really good relationship with our kids that will have long-lasting effects mental health-wise, reduce anxiety, reduce depression, reduce like suicidal thoughts. When you're connected to people, it's just a lot harder.
That's a great point. Again, when we look at teenagers and we look at the adult culture that we have, and we look at our suicide rates and our mental health issues and all the things that have snowballed and imploded in the last couple of years, and not just due to COVID, but before COVID. Yeah, I mean, that's part of what we do is try to educate people on where that stuff comes from. And it comes from not having attachment, not feeling seen, not feeling known, not feeling heard.
Right.
Now, the parents that are listening and you're going, oh God, I've screwed my kid up forever.
Yeah.
Like, you haven't. Well, you might have screwed them up royally, but you have the opportunity to, like, literally today, to stop, pray, connect with yourself, and figure out who you are and how this has happened, and then make amends.
Right. It's in the repair. It's like, I'm sure you tell couples this, like, it's not, the absence of conflict isn't the goal. Can you repair the relationship? And like, that's what, like, you're going to have ruptures in relationships. And so can you, repair those? And I think that gives me a lot of relief as a parent. That's like, okay, I can screw up. Not that I'm going to try to, but I can come back and apologize for the things I've done and ask for forgiveness in it and teach my children what that looks like, and my husband. All those are so good because that just promotes that attachment. But, just we need other people. It's like, and the brain research is another neuron will die off if it's not connected to another. We will die off if we're not connected to another. And so it's like we look at going back to it, just kind of, I think, supports this idea of like, we're so confused to some extent. Like, why is there so much anxiety? Why is there so much depression? Why are the suicide rates like they are? It's like, well, we're not connected, and we don't really know what true community looks like. Because do you know how many people, especially college age students, I've come sit in my office that say, I don't want to tell my friends about this because I don't want to be a burden.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what are we doing here then? Like, literally, what is our purpose here if we're not to share our burdens with each other? And so, but our kids, but I think that, like you're saying, that starts from a point of our kids feeling like they're not too much.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be so mature enough as adults to have our needs met by our community and the adults in our lives and our therapist and our pastor and all these kind of things, that our kids learn from a very early age that their job is not to take care of our emotions. Mm-hmm. Their job is not to perform a certain way, so I'm proud of you. Their job is not to get good grades, so my anxiety and fear falls away. But that's how we parent a lot of times.
Right. And you have kids who are predispositioned to pick up, like, who are going to be more aware of that.
Right.
You have some who are going to be kind of like, well, it's whatever.
Don't care. Yeah.
Right. But there's others who are going to take on your stuff because that's kind of how they're wired to an extent, but it takes a lot of active work as a parent to say, that's not your job. Mm-hmm. I have this, And so, and that's, I think that teaching,
Absolutely.
Like, you can relax.
Yeah. And then model it so they can trust that.
Right.
You can say stuff with your mouth all day long, but they're going to watch your feet. They're going to watch what you do. Mm-hmm. And so I think it takes that dance of using words, talking it out, but also following up and being consistent enough.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but consistent. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I think there's a statistic for good enough parenting.
Yeah.
It was like 30% of the time, 40%. I mean, it's a very low number of how often you need to respond to your kids in order to develop a secure attachment.
Yeah. I think it's a little higher than that.
Is
but
it?
I think it's 70 or 80%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a
Which
lot
isn't
lower.
hard. I mean, that gives you, let's say, 3 times out of 10 to kind of screw up. Mm-hmm. That's a good. It's not you're never going to yell. It's not you're never going to be frustrated. It's not you're never going to have your phone. But they need to be able to look at you 7 out of 10 times and know what to expect.
Yeah, know how you're going to respond.
Yeah, I think in adult relationships it's like 8 or 9. I think it's 9 out of 10. Like in a trusted adult relationship, you need to know what you're going to get out of somebody 9 out of 10 times, or you're not going to trust them. And that's
number.
Right. That stat may be from our trauma and our history, but it also kind of makes sense. Like, I would hope in my marriage,
right?
I don't lie 9 out of 10. I hope I tell the truth 10 out of 10 times. Right? I hope I don't white lie.
Like, ideally.
Right. And my wife's like, does this look good on me? I hope, like, right. Looks great. I love your hair that way. Your new haircut's fantastic. What do you want to eat? Oh, I want this. You don't even care.
Right.
Why'd you ask me?
Right.
You're going to pick whatever necklace you want to pick.
Right.
I don't know why I gave
Why are we
to
doing this dance again?
Oh, gosh. Mm-hmm. Anyway. But yeah, so you hope when you look at it, it's like, why do we lowball it? Right? Why do we go, oh man, I can lie 4 out of 10 times, or I can be inconsistent.
When I hear that, even the statistic is not to lowball it, but to feel like there's not this pressure to perform 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Thomas will reframe that. Yeah, I think you can take it one way of like, oh, well, I could get away with this much. But I kind of take that as more like, it's okay if it isn't perfect.
Yeah.
Because I think our culture in general is like, if you mess up, you're kind of done. Mm-hmm. We don't have a very gracious culture. And so it's just this idea of you're allowed to mess up just like but if we can't allow ourselves to do that, how can we allow our kids to do that?
And when we mess up, 100% of the time you need to be repairing. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I don't really care if it's 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. Mm-hmm. What I care more about is when you screw up, going back in there and making a mistake. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this. I think working with clients in my own therapy, a lot of times we will screw up with our kid, we'll lose our temper, we'll be lazy, whatever. And then we think of that moment that we remember from our childhood that was so terrible. And we're like, oh, well, this was it. I did the thing, and now he's going to be in therapy talking about it, or she's going to be in therapy talking about it forever. Right. The difference is, in my experience and in most of my clients' experiences, no one came back around and repaired that. And that's why I still remember it. Yeah. As I'm in therapy, having the therapist tell me that shouldn't have happened, instead of a parent or an adult or whoever violated the situation, me having another memory of them saying, oh, I let you watch that movie. I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
Oh, I yelled at you in that way. That was me.
Yeah.
Oh, Nobody
took ownership of their part in it.
Yes.
It all came back on you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether they meant that to be the case or not, without repairing, without being explicit, my memory I'm in therapy now, rewriting my brain, reconnecting neural pathways, getting over my coping mechanisms, because God has to repair it, or my wife is trying to repair it, or friends in my life are trying to repair it through our relationships and our attachment, instead of that caregiver, that person coming in and doing it immediately afterwards.
Right. And I reflect back to the times I did have that, where my dad came in and apologized.
Right.
And it was like, okay, this is what, and him saying, I want you to even know how to do this when you do go to college and have a roommate, that you know how to have conflict and talk things through. I remember having those conversations, or mom, whenever I was in high school and didn't know why I was crying for the however many time, just because that's what happens when you're a teenage girl, and having somebody sit with me in it. And it wasn't like, oh, you're ridiculous, get over this, why are you crying again, but to have somebody do that. And so I think, you have the flip side of it. Experiencing it helps you know how to do that with others, right? So now when I read things, when I'm like, oh, I have a memory of what that feels like.
Yes.
And so now I know how to put that into practice. I'm not like confused by it. But if you didn't know that, you're not, I know we said this in the beginning, but it's kind of like you're saying, if you have the experience of how it didn't happen for you and how bad that felt, it takes work to redo that, so then you can know how to do that with your kids.
Absolutely.
Or your wife.
Yeah, and my encouragement in that is, when you screw up, your kids are not going to remember it if you repair it. That's my whole point, is like, they might remember that you yelled that time, or that you were late, or that you forgot to pick them up, or that, whatever the thing is that happened.
You forgot to pick them up.
Yeah, who knows? Or, you're late to whatever. You missed a game. But if you come in and you say explicitly, here's why that happened, I'm responsible for it, this is what it doesn't say about you.
Right.
Then it might hurt their feelings and they may be disappointed, but they're not going to write a narrative.
Right. Around it.
Yes.
And that goes back to understanding a kid's brain and how they're trying to make sense of their world. And if nobody else makes sense of it for them, that they will, I know I said this earlier, but they'll draw their own conclusions. So it does come, and that's where shame comes in. Where shame says, oh, it must be something about you that came into it. And so we don't want to have our kids released to the world with these narratives of how they're the problem. They might have problems because they're human, but it's kind of like, let's help put some words to this, so you're not trying to do this on your own, because you do it on your own, it's going to be a catastrophe.
Right. And we can walk that back to God, walk that back to us, walk that back to when I want what I want, when I want to do what I want. How does that go?
Right. Not well.
Yeah. I asked Grady Jude yesterday. I was like, how you wanted to do this. I remember that we were laughing because I kept saying like a bunch of things, but he was like, I want to do this. I'm like, Daddy's job is to tell you no about things that you don't know.
Right.
You would not wear pants outside and it's 30 degrees. You would not feed yourself. You would not go to sleep. You'd stay up all night. You would eat lots of candy and your belly'd hurt. And we're all just laughing in the bed talking about it yesterday or the day before. But like that they need to hear that, not from a shaming standpoint, but as a reminder. I'll ask him when Grady's really arguing, I'm like, okay, bud, who do you think knows better? Let's think about this. Do you know better, or does Daddy? And he'll just have this look on his face like, you.
He's like mad about it.
Right, but he knows it's true. And I'm like, okay, can you trust me?
Yeah.
I know you think you want to do this, but I need you to trust me. I need you to trust that I know what's best for you, and it's my job to help you, to guide you, to shape you, to walk alongside it. And then sometimes I'm like, all right, I told you that 4 times. I'm not going to tell you again. And then bam, and it's like, okay. I love you. Come here. I'll console you.
Right.
I'll comfort you. I'm really sorry, man. That was really hurt. I know that was a bad choice.
In the back of your,
I'm so sorry. Right. I want to say up front, didn't I just tell you not to do that? 9 times out of 10, I don't do that. But every once in a while, I'm like, bro, I just told you not to do that.
Yeah.
But I try to help him. And then, 5 minutes later, I'm like, okay, what did we learn?
Right.
Well, I thought I knew better, and I tried it. And again, the more of those opportunities they have, the more they learn to trust you instead of themselves. And then as they get older, that can shift, and they can trust themselves more. And you can start to say when they're teenagers, hey, no, that's your decision, bud.
Yeah.
You know what's best for you. If you're going to stay up and not be able to take your test, or you're going to stay up and be tired, like that's on you, and you're going to have to reap those consequences.
Yeah. I love natural consequences.
Whew, man, that's another thing I think. So let's talk about that. We got like 10 minutes left. So we have this swing in culture of zero parenting for so many years, right? Just the kids are there, they're surviving, they're just functioning. There's not real much entertainment in the world. I mean, I think people forget that 60 years ago,
you're working on a farm.
Yeah, or you're literally surviving, and you're going to sleep when the sun comes up, or when the sun goes down, and you're getting up when the sun comes up.
Yeah.
You're going to school, you're coming home and playing with sticks and little dominoes and whatever else. Like you literally have nothing
I wonder if
else.
there's ever people who listen who are older who are like, why do they think that was my life?
Or they're going, yes, that wasn't.
Yeah, right.
Literally dirt floors.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but that was, maybe there's a small percentage of people where that wasn't the case, but for the most of them, that was
Right.
in the 50s, 60s. And then all of a sudden, with Industrial Revolution and technology and television and radio, for the first time ever, we start getting entertained.
Yeah.
And even when I was a kid, I mean, I'll be 40 next year. I'll be 39 on the 27th this month. I'm like, this is the last year, and then now I'm officially there, officially a dad.
Officially a dad. Up to this point, you thought you were a baby.
Yeah, like, for sure. I felt 22 all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I am a father and I own a business.
Back in college 2 years ago.
You're right. Oh, definitely. Yeah, 1990 was only 10 years ago in my head. So, you know, we have this shift where all of a sudden, you know, entertainment's a big thing and you have the comfort and the time to do it. So then we started shifting. We have this history of people who have never been attached, never been attuned for the most part. And then we have the swing of helicopter parenting. And so I think that's the hard thing where when people hear all this therapeutic talk and all this emotions and attachment, a lot of people's instinct is to buck against that or push back against that and go, well, I don't want to create a bunch of weak-minded.
Well, part of me like pushes against it because anything mainstream in our culture, I'm like, it just rubs me the wrong way.
Oh, 100% now. I mean, because they've triggered, you know, all these things have been co-opted.
Well, people use them in everything.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, it's not everywhere. You know, like you know, I'm still trying to even understand. I'm like, why does this make me so frustrated when I hear this?
Right. Well, yeah, with trauma, it's like, okay, there are some things that are just part of life. They are traumatic.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the same thing as like almost dying.
Right. Right.
Right. So you might have had some trauma of that person not being nice to you in line.
Right.
Or not calling you by whatever or doing whatever.
Right.
But depending on the person and their story is depending on how traumatic that really was.
Right. Right.
And so it's, anyway, we can get on a tangent about that. We don't have enough time. My point is that I want my kids to be anti-fragile. And what I mean by that is I don't want them to grow up thinking they're the center of the universe.
Yeah.
But I also want them to know to God they are the center of the universe in the sense that they are loved, they are valued, they are worthy, they are good enough.
Yeah.
Right, that he created them in his image because they're special and unique. At the same time, that's because of God's love for them.
Right.
Not them. Not their ability.
Right. And that truth is kind of what anchors you down to know what the Lord created you for, right? So, like, we're not here just to, like, for our own enjoyment. I hate to say it that way. Like, we're here to do something. Like, what's our purpose?
Yeah.
We were created for something.
Yes.
And get to be a part of what God is doing in that story. And so...
That's got to start early, though, in our conversation with our kids.
Yeah. Right. It's...
to build the anti-fragility.
Right. That it's not all about you.
No, and you're going to suffer.
Right. And it's we could go off on that because we've talked about that a lot because I know growing up for myself, it could be that's the idea is as Christians, we want to be as comfortable as possible. The idea of like God wants good things for us, which is true, but it didn't mean that things were not going to happen to us. Like we weren't meant to be comfortable. And so I get that makes a lot more sense. Just the idea of being anti-fragile of I can have hard things happen and not feel sorry for myself in it.
Yeah.
I can grieve it. I can be confused by it. It can even make you angry. It can produce a whole lot of things, but it's not like the woe is me. How could this happen to me?
Yes.
And it's like, well, the rest of the world suffers. Like we all do. Like you're not like this is not specific to you. So even our kids is like, yeah, this is gonna hurt. And so
I'll grieve with you and I'll cry with you and I'll say yes, this is not what God intended. But God did not intend you to be bullied. God did not intend you to be abused. God did not intend you to fail and to lose and all these things. But it's a part of life. And so how does that define you? And what is God doing in that?
Right.
And so when that bully is mean, that doesn't say anything about you, but it also still hurts. Right?
Yeah.
But now what?
Yeah. Well, like how do you go about how do you rework? And there are some things where like you literally have to change the situation.
Yeah.
You know, like if you are you have a kid who's being bullied and it's just not going well. And it's literally destroying kind of who they are. You speak the truth of like, hey, this is not who you are, but also, do we need to change something?
Yeah. Do we need to move schools if they're not going to adapt, if they're not going to do whatever?
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as your kid. Somebody said, "Oh, I don't like your shirt," and now they're being bullied.
Right.
And I think that's what I mean. Like, there's this. Each situation is different.
Yeah.
And we've co-opted.
Or they said something that I'm offended by, and it's like you didn't have to like it. but it doesn't mean that it needs to ruin your world
Right.
because of it.
Because that's saying that other people's opinions and other people's focus and other people's desires and likes and dislikes have something to do with your identity.
Right.
And I think a strong part of parental discipleship as Christians in the world we live in is teaching them that external things do not determine internal worth and value.
Yeah.
And you can not like that or not agree with it, and it doesn't have anything to do with you.
Right.
Because that also teaches them grace for that other person. That if they choose to do something we don't like, or they like a certain thing that we don't like, or they say words we don't say, their worth and value is not less than because of that.
Right. And not every interaction they have is because of them.
Right. They're not the
You know,
center of the universe.
Well, I mean, even as therapists, we have to be aware of, like, we may have transference to the client who's putting stuff on us. I say we may feel like, oh, is this a reflection of me as a therapist?
Absolutely.
And it's like, no, that's them working through their own stuff.
Yeah.
If I'm here to be a part of that, great. And we will work through it together. But I don't need to walk out thinking I need to go work on myself in some way.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, even like you're saying, how to help our kids, like, it is not like this person, how can we understand, take a step back and say they may be struggling? Doesn't mean you have to take, like, there's, like you're saying, and even helping them understand, like, there's one level it's just too much. Like, that is just cruel. That should not happen. And that's one thing. But also, if you're hearing things you just don't like, how do we just kind of move on from that and just kind of understand that's where that person's at?
Yeah, absolutely. And so how do we do that? And I think that, just to kind of wrap up, is what I want parents to see is they have to be an active member in that relationship. They have to see their kid not as a thing to shape and mold and turn into, which is partly part of it, but also a totally different person made by God with a totally different plan for their life, with an agenda that God's going to use, with a story that's supposed to be told. And how do we walk alongside them, figuring out who they are, instead of saying, well, you're going to be this way because you're a Davis.
Right.
You know, you're going to be this way because you're a Cortez. You're going to be this way because you're, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's how we are.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom there.
Yeah. And I think
To say, on the opposite end, to say, like, we're not going to mold you because of this. It's because of who God is. Like, we're going to get to see what his plan is for you. That's exciting.
Yes.
And we're going to walk alongside you in it.
Yeah, and we're going to, you know, of course, for a while be in charge. But at the same time, as you get older, I have to prepare you to be in the world. And so it's not like people ask me this with technology. Well, how are they going to be 18, you know, and not know how to use a phone if I don't give it to them?
They're pretty quick learners.
Right. Well, but also like, you don't have to go from no phone to phone.
Right.
You know, like, there can be some accountability and some walking beside you. And it's
Very
like,
all or nothing.
you don't go from not driving a car ever to getting your license.
Right. Right. There's practice.
Yeah, there's like steps and practice and permits and accountability and trust built. And then you still know they're going to screw it up and probably hit the pole in the parking lot.
Right. Right.
You know, you're not like, oh, you're a fantastic driver because you did this. Same thing with their cell phone, you know, but it's the same thing with everything.
Right.
They're going to bully. They're going to push. They're going to hit. They're going to lie. They're going to be lazy. They're going to miss a test.
They're going to procrastinate and put something off till the night before.
Yes.
You don't have to stay up and do it with them.
No. And how we are is how they are in some ways. And so we have to be able to understand that, and to be able to not put all those expectations on ourselves and on them. And I think that's the problem we've kind of pigeonholed ourselves into as a culture of parents, as Christians, is we haven't recovered from our own crap. We don't know how that crap is affecting us. And now we're replaying that out, either trying not to do what our parents did with the arrogance of, I can't believe they did it, I won't do it. Right? Or we're doing the same things because we're attached in an unhealthy way to our parents, and we're going, oh, I have to do everything that they did because I want them to still be proud of me.
Right. Yeah. Those are literally the two options that end up happening if you don't understand your story.
Right. And so for everybody out there listening, we encourage you to do some therapy, do some homework. If you're doing your own work, and a lot of you that listen to this podcast are, I did want to say that we before we came on, we looked it up and we hit 30,000 downloads with our podcast. So thank you all for listening, for subscribing, for leaving comments, for going and leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts. I read them. I appreciate all the feedback y'all give us for this thing. I'm so thankful that we have the community we have with Mary Kate and the therapists over in Ruston and all of our therapists here in Shreveport and Bossier, our integrative wellness team, you know, all the stuff we've done this year that we've grown in. It comes from listeners and people following us and people liking and sharing our social media stuff and coming to speaking events. And so we just hope this podcast is encouraging and enriching to you as a parent, as a grandparent, as anybody working with kids, that it helps you understand them more, But ultimately, it helps you understand who you are in Christ and how God sees you. And so I think if we're always working from that, we don't want to focus on content and behavior, but we want to, focus on the root and really get into the whys of how all this works. So Mary Kate, I'm always fun I forgot we were doing the podcast. So we just got into talking like we normally do about stuff.
Right. Just going off on tangents.
Absolutely.
So hopefully this made sense to everybody.
Yeah, who knows? It felt like our normal phone call.
Right. Can you believe those kids?
That's right. So I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts, comments?
We didn't go over Christmas time.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Christmas. If you're listening to this in the future, we hope Christmas 2021 went well. We didn't have much for advice for Christmas.
Try to keep those schedules there.
Maybe I'll do one next week.
Right. Before New Year's.
Hey, next year, maybe you can listen to this podcast.
Right. But no, I'm, y'all, parents, it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to feel like you're losing it sometimes, but also get help if you need it. But get a good community around you.
Absolutely. And again, for Christmas, I will give one tip. Your kids just want you to be there and be connected and to see them and to be around them. They may act like they want the new tablet or the new phone or the new thing, but that's just covering up, their need for connection. So just make it intentional, make it prioritized that you spend some time with them. They may act like they don't care. Do some device-free time over the holidays and really just do a trip, do a vacation, make a Walmart run or a Target run. God forbid Walmart. And do whatever you have to do. So God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for following us. Keep it up. And I think we'll get back to full-on weekly podcast starting in January. So thank you. God bless and have a good end of the year. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Peace out.